I woke up to the shaking of the airplane. The cabin was lit only by the sparse nightlights above the seats. Most of the passengers were asleep, covered with thin blue blankets. Outside the window was pitch black, no stars or moon. We were flying somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, if the map on the screen was to be believed. Home. Earlier than planned. When the travel agency sent an email canceling the second part of the tour, I didn't believe it at first. 3 months of planning, deferred time off, and anticipation all came crashing down, along with tons of Peruvian soil and rocks. Of course, no one died, and I should have been grateful for at least that, but the feeling of disappointment was stronger. "Excuse me, can I get you something to drink?" The stewardess leaned toward me with a professional smile. "Water, please." My voice sounded hoarse after hours of silence. My throat was dry. My head was splitting from the pressure and lack of sleep. 18 hours on an airplane with a layover in Mexico City had drained me of all my energy. I took a sip of water and closed my eyes again, trying to picture my home quiet, empty, cool. A place where I could finally relax and lick the wounds of disappointment. The cab dropped me off in front of my house around 7 in the evening. Dusk was settling in, but it was light enough to notice the unusual liveliness of our usually sleepy street. I rubbed my eyes, thinking that fatigue was playing tricks on me. But no, the entire driveway was littered with cars, some parked even on the lawn. A black sedan I didn't recognize was parked right on top of my favorite hydrangeas. The driver helped me get my suitcase out of the trunk and drove off, leaving me alone with a bad feeling. There was laughter and music coming from the open windows. My house, which should have welcomed me with peace and quiet, was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. I pulled my suitcase down the driveway, maneuvering with difficulty between parked cars. On the porch were 2 men with cans of beer, smoking and talking animatedly. One of them seemed vaguely familiar, perhaps the husband of a third cousin. They nodded at me as if I were an occasional guest, not the lady of the house. The front door was wide open. I stepped across the threshold and froze. The living room, which I'd left perfectly clean before I left, now resembled a train station waiting room. Dozens of people were sitting, standing, walking, talking, laughing. Kids scurried between the adults, crumbs and stains of something red on my white carpet. "Audrey!" A shrill voice cut through the general hum. "What are you doing here?" My mother, Phyllis, wearing an apron over her smart dress, glared at me from the kitchen doorway. She was holding a large salad bowl, my check glass salad bowl that I kept for special occasions. "I live here," I answered, surprised at the calmness in my own voice. "The question is, what are all these people doing here?" My mother set the salad bowl on the nearest table and walked over to me, eyeing me critically. "God, you look awful! Why didn't you tell me you were coming back? We're having a family reunion with all the Cranshaws from the East Coast. You'd know that if you'd been answering my texts." I did see notifications from her, but after the news about the tour being canceled, I didn't have the energy to even open the messages. I thought it was just the usual questions about my trip. "The tour was canceled because of the collapse," I said tiredly. "But that doesn't explain why you arranged a meeting at my house without my permission." Phyllis brushed it off, as if I were talking about some unimportant detail. "Don't be so dramatic. This is your grandmother's house, the family home. Where else are we supposed to gather? Why don't you go change your clothes? You look like a tramp. And wash up, for God's sake." She turned and went into the kitchen, and I stood there with my suitcase, feeling like an uninvited guest in my own home. Vaguely familiar faces turned toward me, some nodding, some smiling, but most didn't even notice my presence, continuing to chat loudly. Audrey, Lucas, my younger brother, emerged from the crowd with a glass of wine. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be lugging around the jungle for another 2 weeks." He put his free arm around me, smelling of expensive cologne and alcohol. "The track collapsed," I repeated. "The tour was canceled." "Too bad." He didn't seem particularly upset. "But I made it in time for the family reunion. Aunt Martha brought her twins, and they're already in college. Can you believe it? And Cousin Roger finally got married, And his wife is that blonde girl over there by the fireplace? I nodded, unable to share his enthusiasm. All I wanted was a shower and silence. Lucas, I'm really tired. 18 hours on an airplane. Sure, sure. He patted my shoulder. Get some rest and come downstairs. I was just showing everyone your new kitchen. Everyone is raving about the island. They say I designed the space perfectly. My heart skipped a beat. You what? Well, I helped you pick out the tile, remember? He winked and disappeared into the crowd before I could object. Helped me pick out tile. He came to the store with me once because he was on his way and told me the gray tile was too boring. That's all the help I needed. I dragged my suitcase toward the stairs, maneuvering between the guests. A middle-aged woman with a glass of champagne turned to me and smiled broadly. You must be Audrey. I'm Margaret, your father's cousin. We met at your grandmother's funeral, but I don't think you remember. What a lovely home you have. Thank you. I tried to smile, but it was probably a grimace. Excuse me, I need to… Sure, sure, she waved her hand. Phyllis said you just got off the plane. You look awful, dear. Go get some rest. I couldn't bring myself to resent another comment about my appearance, so I just nodded and continued toward the stairs. It was quieter on the second floor, but there were still voices coming from the first guest bedroom. The door to the second was closed, and children's laughter could be heard from behind it. I finally reached my bedroom and closed the door behind me, leaning my back against it. Immediately, I realized something was wrong. The bed was perfectly made up, not the way I'd left it, but hotel style, with a pulled blanket and decorative pillows. There was a glass water bottle and a glass on the bedside table, and on a chair by the window lay someone's travel bag. My heart raced with growing anger. Someone hadn't just entered my room, someone was living in it. I walked over to my closet and swung the doors open. Other people's dresses and blouses hung among my clothes, and neatly folded jeans and sweaters lay on a shelf. The bathroom held new surprises. On the shelves around the sink were bottles of other people's perfume, jars of cream, tubes of toothpaste. My own toiletries were pushed into a corner, as if they'd been favored by being allowed to stay. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what was happening. My house had been taken over. My own room had been given to some guest, and no one had even thought to ask my permission. Heels clacked in the hallway. The door swung open without a knock. There you are! Mother came in, wiping her hands on her apron. Why don't you come down? Everyone is asking about you. Who lives in my room? I asked bluntly. Phyllis looked at the bag, then at me. That's Carol, your Uncle Fred's wife. They have 3 children and needed a separate room. We weren't expecting you, Audrey. If you had warned us… I don't need warning to go back to my own house. My voice sounded muffled. This is my house, Mom. Grandmother left it to me, not the rest of the family. Phyllis pressed her lips together. You were always so possessive. Grandma wanted it to be a family home. Besides, it's just for the weekend. We'd have it all cleaned up before you got back. You wouldn't even notice. Like so many times before, I felt my anger dissolve into fatigue. It was useless to argue with Phyllis. She always had a way of twisting things so that I was at fault. Where am I supposed to sleep now? I asked. There's a cot in the study. She waved toward the door. Lucas put it there when you got here. He's so thoughtful. I almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. I'd been evicted from my own bedroom to my office on a cot, and they expect me to thank them for it. I'm going to take a shower, I said, not looking at my mother. Just don't be late. Dinner's in 20 minutes. And wear something decent. It's a family reunion after all. The door closed behind her, and I finally let myself breathe out. I pulled my toothbrush out of my suitcase and went to the guest bathroom, the only place where the uninvited guests hadn't settled in yet. The hot water washed away the fatigue a little, but not the irritation. I changed into clean jeans and a blouse and went downstairs, figuring it would be easier to get through the evening than to make a scene. The living room had turned into a makeshift dining room. A long table was made up of several smaller ones, including my desk from the study. Tablecloths, dishes, utensils, all mine, arranged by other people's hands. "Here comes our traveler," announced loudly a man I didn't immediately recognize as Uncle Fred, husband of the very Carol who had taken my bedroom. "How's Peru, niece?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "The tour was canceled." "Oh, that's a shame." Aunt Martha sighed faintly. "But at least you're with us. It's so rare for us to get together." I nodded, unable to share her enthusiasm. Lucas appeared with a bottle of wine, pouring it into glasses. "Hey, everyone!" He raised his glass. "To the Cranshaw family." And to Audrey, who unwittingly became the hostess of our meeting. Laughter, clinking glasses. I was smiling, but inside I was growing a sense of unreality. Someone asked about my work. Someone told me about their children. The conversation flowed around me without hitting me. "We're so glad you've all come to our family nest," Phyllis said, sitting at the head of the table where I was. "Ever since Mom left us this house, we've been trying to keep it as a place where the whole family gathers." "We!" I looked up, but no one seemed to notice the reservation. Or was it not a caveat? Maybe my mother really thought Grandma had left the house to the whole family, not just me. Dinner was over, but the party went on. Someone turned the music up louder. Someone suggested playing board games. I sat in the corner of the couch, watching what was happening like a strange spectacle. Young cousins, whose names I couldn't remember, were discussing weekend plans. "We can go to the lake tomorrow," one of them said. "You have a boat, don't you, Lucas?" My brother nodded, saluting with his glass. "Sure, and then we can hang out here this weekend. Audrey has a great grill in the backyard. I installed it last summer." Another lie. "I bought the grill myself. Lucas only helped me put it together, and he was reluctant." "Sounds great," replied my cousin. "It's nice to have a place like this where the whole family can gather." I looked at them, and something chilled inside. They were talking about my house like it belonged to everyone, like I was just a random custodian of the family property. And the worst part was that I let them think that, having spent years not resisting that attitude. I woke up to the clinking of dishes and children's laughter coming from the first floor. The cot in the study creaked as I rolled onto my side. My back ached from the uncomfortable mattress, and my neck was so stiff I could barely turn my head. My phone read 8:30 in the morning, an early hour for me on my day off, especially after a grueling flight. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was and why I wasn't sleeping in my own bed. Memories of last night came in a wave of irritation: family reunion, uninvited guests, my room, given to Aunt Carol and Uncle Fred. The study window overlooked the garden, and as I propped myself up on my elbows, I saw children already playing in the backyard. 3 boys, I think Carol's sons, were running around my lily pond. No supervision, of course. I sat on the cot, rubbing my neck. In the corner stood my suitcase, not even unpacked. Yesterday, I'd only had the strength to brush my teeth and collapse into bed. Or rather, on that torture device Lucas proudly called a comfy cot. My own office looked alien. The books on the shelves had been rearranged. The computer desk pushed against the wall to make room for the cot. There were someone's empty glasses and a plate of dried cookie crumbs on the countertop. I reached for my phone and saw 2 missed calls from Nolan. He must have heard about my early return from mutual acquaintances. I didn't want to call back, not here, where every word could be overheard. Gathering my willpower, I got up, grabbed clean clothes from my suitcase, and headed for the guest bathroom. Even there were signs of someone else's presence: a child's toothbrush in a cup, wet towels scattered on the floor. The kitchen hummed like a beehive. Phyllis was in her element, commanding the breakfast process. Aunt Martha was frying pancakes, someone was whipping eggs, and the children were scrambling around, begging for candy. "Good morning, sleepyhead." My mother saw me first. "Coffee's on the table. Get it while it's hot." I silently poured myself a cup of coffee, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. I went to the window, looking out into the backyard, where a new children's game was starting. They were throwing sticks into my pond. "It's a beautiful morning, isn't it?" Carol, the same one who'd slept in my bed, appeared next to me. "I'm sorry about the confusion about the room last night. Phyllis said you wouldn't mind." "It's okay," I lied automatically, forcing out a duty smile. She patted me on the shoulder and went back to the others. I stayed by the window, watching the kids. The youngest of the boys picked something up off the ground, an oblong white object, and threw it into the water. Something inside me trembled. I set the cup down and walked quickly out the back door. "Hey!" I shouted to the boys. "What are you doing out there?" They turned around with frightened faces, clearly not expecting to be caught. "Nothing," said the oldest, about 10 years old. "Just playing." I walked over to the pond. The water was murky from the silt that had risen from the bottom, but I could still see the white shards at the bottom. My heart beat faster. "What did you throw into the pond?" The boys looked at each other. "Some kind of vase," the younger one muttered. "It was already broken." I dipped my hand into the cold water and pulled out one of the shards. White porcelain with a blue pattern. My vase. More specifically, my grandmother's vase that she brought back from Japan 40 years ago. Handmade ceramic, painted in a traditional pattern. "Who broke that vase?" My voice sounded strangely calm, even though I was seething inside. "I don't know," the older man shrugged. "It was on the dresser, and then it fell. Mom said you wouldn't notice anyway." I squeezed the shard in my hand so hard that the sharp edge dug into my skin. The pain was sobering. I unclenched my fingers and threw the shard back into the water. "Go inside," I said quietly, "and don't touch anything else." The children scurried away, and I stayed by the pond, staring at the broken vase, drowning in the murky water. Grandma had brought it back from the only trip abroad in her life. "It's a reminder that it's never too late to see the world," she used to say. The vase survived moves, repairs, even an earthquake in 2008, but it didn't survive meeting my family. When I returned to the house, breakfast was in full swing. No one noticed my absence or return. I went upstairs, deciding to take a moment to survey the extent of the destruction. The living room was in relative order, except for the wine stains on my light-colored carpet. The dining room was worse, with a huge burgundy stain on the antique dresser I'd gotten from my grandmother, and a few damp glass marks. I ran my finger along the dark wood, feeling my eyes fill with tears of anger. The dresser was the same age as my grandmother's, made in 1940, before the war. Perfectly preserved until yesterday. In a small niche under the stairs, I kept the family photo albums. The door of the niche was ajar, and a light was burning inside. Strange, I rarely looked in there. Pulling the door open, I froze on the threshold. Albums were scattered on the floor, some open, pages crumpled. One had a sticky stain on it. Someone must have spilled a drink. I knelt down, picking up the scattered photos that had fallen out of the albums. Black and white snapshots of my great-grandparents. Color Polaroids from picnics in the 70s. Pictures of me as a child. Family history strewn carelessly across the floor. "Oh, you found the albums!" Lucas's voice made me wince. "We showed the kids the old photos yesterday. They're fascinated by how little we were." I turned to him slowly, still clutching the crumpled pictures in my hands. "Look what you've done." My voice shook. "The albums are ruined. The dresser is ruined. The vase is broken." Lucas frowned, peering over my shoulder. "Come on, it's not that bad. It's just a couple stains. I'll make it up to you honestly." "How?" I stood up, looking him in the eye. "How do you make up for Grandma's vase from Japan? Or these pictures that are 70 years old?" He waved me away like I was talking about nothing. "We'll find a vase just like it, and the photographs. Well, they can be scanned in this digital age." I closed my eyes, counting to 10. It was useless. Lucas never understood the value of things, especially if they didn't belong to him. "Look," he put his hand on my shoulder. "I'll really make amends. As soon as I finish the current project and get my bonus. A month at the most." I knew that song by heart. A year ago, he'd promised to refund the money for his car repairs as soon as he got his bonus. 6 months ago, for the new laptop I bought him after he crashed his own. The money never showed up. "Forget it," I said tiredly. "Just forget it." Lucas brightened, taking my words as forgiveness. You're the best sister ever. He kissed me on the cheek and rushed downstairs, where his wife was calling him. I stayed in the alcove, slowly putting the photos back into the albums, even though I knew many of them were beyond saving. Torn corners, sticky finger marks, scratches. My family's history now bore the mark of their indifference. When I went downstairs, I found that most of the guests had already left. Only the closest people remained: Lucas's family, Aunt Martha and her husband, and, of course, my mother, who was in charge of cleaning. That is, she gave instructions to two women while she drank tea in an armchair. "Ah, there you are," she nodded at me. "We're almost done with the cleaning. It'll be as good as new by tonight." I looked around the living room. Cleaning consisted of putting the dirty dishes in the sink and putting the trash in bags that stood in the middle of the room. No one even mentioned the stains on the carpet and dresser. "Does anyone know about the vase?" I asked bluntly. Mother frowned. "What vase?" "Grandma's, Japanese, the one that was broken and thrown into the pond." There was an awkward pause. Aunt Martha lowered her eyes. Lucas was suddenly interested in his phone. "Oh, that one." Phyllis waved her hand. "Some cheap thing from the gift store. Don't worry, we'll get a new one." I was out of breath. Cheap? Grandma had been saving for this trip for 10 years. The vase was the only thing she brought for herself, forgoing other souvenirs to stay within her budget. "Mom knows the value of the vase," Lucas interjected, probably sensing my condition. "I'll make it up to you, I promise." "Enough about the vase," Phyllis said. "We have more important things to talk about, like when are you going to do a real cleaning of the house? It's dusty, the windows haven't been cleaned in months." I didn't answer. I just left the room. I needed air. And quiet. And at least one place that didn't feel like a total invasion. On the porch, I pulled out my phone and dialed Nolan. He answered after the second ring. "Audrey, you're back? What happened to the tour?" His voice, low and calm, was like a balm to me. Nolan had been my anchor in the stormy sea of family relationships for years. "A collapse on the track," I answered, stepping off the porch and away from the house. The entire second half of the tour was canceled. "Damn, that's a shame. Are you okay?" Not, "How was Peru?" or "Wish I'd seen Machu Picchu." Just whether I'm okay. Those simple words of concern made me stop in the middle of the path, blinking to hold back sudden tears. "Not really," I admitted quietly. "I came home, and there was the circus." "Your family?" I could hear the understanding in his voice. "Yeah. My mom had a family reunion at my house, without warning." Nolan whistled softly. "How many people?" "About 30. They slept here, Nolan. Some relatives slept in my bed, and they put me on a cot in the study." There was a pause, and I knew he was choosing his words. Nolan never said platitudes like, "It'll all work out," or "Family is family." "How are you feeling?" he finally asked. I leaned against an old apple tree at the edge of the property. It was like I'd been robbed. They'd broken Grandma's vase, ruined the photo albums, stained the dresser with wine, and no one even apologized. On the contrary, I should be grateful that they cleaned up most of it. "Terrible," Nolan summarized succinctly. "Do you want me to come over?" I smiled into the phone. Nolan always offered concrete help, not empty reassurance. "Thanks, but no. They'll be gone soon. At least, I hope so." After talking to Nolan, I felt a little better. I walked around the house slowly, assessing the exterior damage. The tulip bed had been trampled, cigarette butts were lying on the lawn, and someone's car was still parked on my hydrangeas. By late afternoon, most of the guests had finally dispersed. Only Lucas and his wife and kids remained. They had decided to spend the night again, to help with the cleanup in the morning. Phyllis stayed as well, taking the second guest bedroom. I was banished to the cot again. When it got dark, I went out into the garden, hoping to be quiet. The house was lit up with all the windows. Inside, Lucas and his wife were watching some show on TV. The kids were running around the second floor. My mother was talking on the phone, loudly as she always did. I sat on a bench by the pond, looking out at the dark water, which reflected stars and vase shards. It smelled of jasmine and freshly cut grass. This garden had been my sanctuary since I'd moved here, after my grandmother died. I read here, worked on my laptop in nice weather, sometimes just sat here watching the birds and squirrels. Hi! A quiet voice made me flinch. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. My neighbor, Peyton Hamish, was standing in the driveway, tall, with short graying hair, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. A former corporate lawyer who had given up her career a year ago and was now painting. We rarely spoke to each other, only said hello over the fence. It's okay. I made an inviting gesture. Would you like to sit down? She sank down beside me, holding a paper bag. I actually came to complain, she said with a slight smile. Yesterday was noisy. I'm sorry. I rubbed my forehead. It wasn't me. I mean, it's my family, but I didn't realize they were having a meeting. Peyton nodded, not looking surprised. That's what I thought when I saw you today. You don't look like the kind of person who throws parties. Not at all, I agreed. I was supposed to be in Peru. Peru, she smiled dreamily. I was there 5 years ago. Amazing place. We were silent for a moment, looking at the water. Strangely, I felt more at ease with this almost stranger than with my own family. I brought you something. Peyton handed me a bag. I thought you might need it. Inside, I found a bottle of good red wine and a box of expensive chocolates. That's, very nice. But why? I was genuinely surprised. Peyton shrugged. I thought you needed moral support. Your family, do they do this a lot? What do you mean? They throw parties at your house when you're not there. I froze, feeling a chill go down my spine. What do you mean? Peyton looked embarrassed, like she'd said something she shouldn't have. It's just, I've seen them here a few times in the last few months, when you were away. My heart was racing. A few times? When exactly? She hesitated, counting in her mind. Last month, when you were at the conference in Seattle. Then, I think it was a weekend in March. And definitely Christmas, while you were visiting a friend in New York. Every date you mentioned was a blow. I was actually away on those days. At a cybersecurity conference, on a business trip, and visiting a former coworker. And all the while, my family was using my home as their own. We sat for a while longer, talking about nothing. The weather, gardening, books. Peyton proved to be an interesting conversationalist, with a subtle sense of humor and no tendency to idle chatter. When she left, I stayed on the bench, looking out at the lighted windows of my house. A house that, as it turned out, hadn't belonged to me alone for a long time. One that had been used without asking, one that had been commandeered, one that had been treated as family property, and me as only a temporary caretaker. I looked at those glowing windows and saw not walls, but transparent boundaries that my family crossed when they wanted to, without a thought for my feelings. Glass walls that gave the illusion of protection, but really didn't protect me from anything. My home. Or rather, it wasn't my home anymore. The place that was supposed to be my sanctuary had become a backyard. Peyton's words echoed in my head. I've seen them here a few times in the last few months, when you were away. They came here when I was gone, used my house as if it were their own, without asking, without permission. Grandma left this house to me, just me, not the whole family. Her will clearly stated, to my granddaughter, Audrey Irene Cranshaw, I leave the house and everything in it. I remembered those words by heart because they were special to me. My grandmother believed that I would keep the house, that I would take care of it as she did. But what did I do? Allowed my family to trample not only my boundaries, but also the memory of my grandmother. The broken vase, the ruined dresser, the destroyed photo albums. And now I found out that they regularly threw parties here in my absence. At 4 a.m, the decision came. Sudden as a flash of light. Clear and straightforward. I must sell the house. Not because I don't love it. On the contrary, precisely because I do. Because I can't bear to see it become common property, devalued and ruined. Sell it and start over. somewhere without this constant intrusion. As soon as I made the decision, a strange calmness came over me. I got up off the cot, pulled out my laptop, and started looking up information about the real estate market in Midland. Prices had gone up over the past year, especially in my neighborhood. A three-bedroom house with a large lot and a pond could be worth around $2 million, maybe a little more because of the good condition and recent renovations. That's settled. I'll ask for $3 million. It was knowingly overpriced, almost double the market price. Partly I was doing it to buy time. Hardly anyone would agree to such a sum at once, so I'd have a chance to think it over. But somewhere deep inside, I was hoping for a miracle. For a buyer for whom money does not matter. By 7 a.m., I had sent inquiries to 5 real estate agents. By 8, when the house started to wake up, I had 3 responses, all of them expressing interest, although they warned of the inflated price. Lucas and Phyllis left around 11, promising to return this weekend to help with the cleanup. I smiled and nodded, already knowing things would be very different by the weekend. At noon, I met with the first realtor, a young woman with bright lipstick and an overly loud laugh. She walked around the house, clacking her heels on the hardwood floors, and kept saying, "Nice house, but $3 million? You're kidding, right?" The second agent, a full middle-aged man, was more professional. He carefully inspected the house, took measurements, photographed every room. "Objectively, Ms. Cranshaw, your house is worth at most 1 in 7, maybe 1 in 8, if there's a lover of old buildings with character. But $3 million, he shook his head. I can put it up at that price, but be prepared for a long wait or a substantial reduction. I thanked him politely and told him I would think about his offer. The third meeting was in the evening. The realtor was 20 minutes late, and I was about to cancel when a black sedan pulled up to the house. A man of about 45, wearing a suit and carrying a leather briefcase, got out. "Mrs. Cranshaw?" He held out his hand. "I apologize for being late. Wilson Haley, Premium Realty Agency." His handshake was dry and firm, his gaze assessing. Without waiting for an invitation, he strode into the house and began his inspection, asking precise questions about year of construction, materials, utilities. No unnecessary words, no comments about overpricing. When he finished, he sat down at the kitchen table and opened his briefcase. "Your house is interesting," he said, pulling out the documents, "especially the lot. Do you know what's going on in your neighborhood?" I shook my head. Greenwood Investments is buying up property on 3 neighboring streets. There are plans to build an industrial park. The information isn't public yet, but that's about to change. I've heard whispers of some zoning changes, but I haven't paid much attention. "What does that mean for me?" Haley smiled, discreetly, with just his lips. "It means that your price of $3 million might not be so unrealistic. Greenwood is interested in acquiring all of the sites quickly. I can set up a meeting with their representative as early as tomorrow." I swallowed, suddenly realizing that my impulsive decision might come to fruition much faster than I'd planned. "Tomorrow?" "That's too soon. I need to think it over." "Of course." He pulled out a business card. "Call me when you're ready, but don't take too long. You can't wait for an offer like that." After he left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the card. 2 feelings fought inside: fear of radical change and a strange, almost gloating anticipation. I pictured Phyllis's face when she found out the house was sold. Lucas's face when he realized he would no longer be able to use my house as his own. I called Nolan. "I need advice," I said as soon as he answered. "Legal advice." "Sounds serious." I could hear the smile in his voice. "What happened? Did you get arrested for killing annoying relatives?" "Not yet, but the idea's tempting." I smiled involuntarily. "I want to sell the house." There was a pause. "Wow," he finally said. "That's unexpected. What happened?" I told him everything, about the way the family had used my house while I was gone, about the broken vase and the ruined albums, about Peyton's words. How I felt like a stranger in my own home. And now there's a buyer willing to pay $3 million, I finished. Some investment company that's building a technology park. Sounds suspiciously lucrative, Nolan said. Are you sure it's not a scam? That's why I'm calling. Can you help me check the paperwork? The meeting's tomorrow. Sure, he answered without hesitation. I'll be there. What time? 2, Srar. And, Nolan, don't tell anyone, okay? I want to tell my family myself. When it's settled. The meeting with the Greenwood Investments representative was quick and businesslike. A tall man with thinning hair introduced himself as Marcus Finch, Director of Acquisitions. He toured the house and lot, asked a few questions about utilities and neighbors. We're ready to purchase your property for the asking price, he said, returning to the living room. $3 million, with the deal closing in a week. I glanced over at Nolan, who was sitting next to me, reviewing the paperwork. That fast? We're interested in a quick resolution, Finch nodded. All the documents are ready to be signed. Nolan raised his hand, stopping him. Not so fast. We want to check all the legal aspects, and I need to make sure my client's rights are fully protected. Finch smiled, showing flawless teeth. Of course. Here are copies of all the documents. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. We can schedule the signing for Monday, if that's all right with you. Nolan spent the next 2 hours studying every page, every clause of the contract. I watched him, amazed at his attention to detail. Although literature was his profession, law had always been a passionate hobby. It's all clear, he said at last. No pitfalls, no hidden conditions. They're really willing to pay $3 million. The only thing is, you have to vacate the house by next Friday. A week from next Friday? I blinked. That soon? They're in a hurry. Apparently it's a big project. Nolan looked at me carefully. Do you still want to do it? It's not too late to say no. I looked around the living room. The walls that remembered my childhood. The windows through which I watched the seasons change. The armchair where my grandmother used to read me fairy tales. And the wine stain on the carpet that no one even tried to scrub away. And the empty spot where the Japanese vase used to stand. And the photo albums, carelessly tossed into a drawer after they'd been unwrapped by someone else's hands. Yes, I said firmly. I want to do it. At 9 o'clock on Monday morning, I signed all the papers. By 10:30, $3 million had been deposited into my account, a sum that would have seemed fantastic a week ago. By 11, I had already ordered packing services and a new apartment. I didn't say a word to my family, not Phyllis, not Lucas, not any of the relatives. Let it be a surprise, just like their family reunion at my house. As I packed my personal belongings, I separated what had value to me from what I could keep. I collected the vase shards from the pond and carefully wrapped them in a soft cloth. Maybe someday I'd find a craftsman who could restore it. I scanned the photo albums, saving the digital copies. I packed the originals, too, though many of the pages were hopelessly damaged. The dresser I decided to take with me, despite the stains. It was a memento of my grandmother, who had lived in the house for over 50 years. Phyllis called Thursday night. Lucas and I will stop by tomorrow, she said without preamble. There's something we need to talk about. Okay, I answered calmly. I'll see you at lunch. I didn't tell her that half of my things would be packed by then. Let her see for herself. They arrived at 12 sharp. Punctuality was always Phyllis's strong suit. I opened the door and let them into the living room, where there were boxes of books and dishes. What's going on? Phyllis stopped in the middle of the room, looking around. Are you moving in? Yes, I smiled. The house is sold. The new owners take possession next Friday. The silence that followed my words was almost palpable. Phyllis froze with her mouth open, Lucas blinking as if he didn't know what I was talking about. You… What? My mother finally squeezed out. Sold the house, I repeated calmly. For $3 million. The buyer was Greenwood Investment Company. You can't! Phyllis swayed and Lucas held her elbow. You can't just sell the house. I can. I crossed my arms over my chest. In fact, I already did. The house belongs to me. My grandmother left it to me, not the whole family. But this, she was choking with indignation. You didn't even consult us. Did you consult me when you threw parties here in my absence? My voice remained calm, though my insides were boiling. When you broke Grandma's vase? When you messed with the photo albums? Lucas stepped forward, his face white with anger. You can't do that to family. I was planning on moving here after the divorce. I already told my friends I was going to live here. You did? I raised an eyebrow. And when were you going to tell me that? He was silent, and in his silence was the answer. Never. He'd just decided he could have my house as his own. Audrey! Phyllis switched to a tactic that had always worked in the past. The pitiful tone. You don't understand. This house is our legacy. I was counting on us to use it as collateral for a loan. Lucas wants to expand the business. He needs funds. That's it. They were planning on using my house as collateral. Without my knowledge, of course. What kind of business? I asked straight up. Lucas doesn't have a business. He's a manager at a construction company. I was going to start my own business, my brother mumbled. A construction consulting agency. Mom promised to help with a loan. Using my house as collateral, I nodded. Without my consent, of course. You would have agreed, Phyllis exclaimed. You always agree, Audrey. You can't just change overnight. Something cracked inside me, a barrier that had held back anger and resentment for years, a dam that hid all the unspoken words. Exactly, my voice shook. I'd always agreed. I've always acquiesced, always let you decide for me. When you, Mom, moved in with me for 3 months after my surgery, even though I worked from home and needed the quiet. When you, Lucas, brought your friends to a sleepover unannounced, and they threw a party that left me scrubbing beer off the walls for a week. When you told everyone it was a family home, even though my grandmother had clearly stated in her will that she was leaving it to me. I took a breath, feeling my hands shake. When you came here in my absence. Yeah, I know about that. Peyton told me how many times she saw you here when I was away. You used my house like it was a hotel. You broke my stuff and didn't even bother to apologize. You invited 30 people to a meeting without asking my permission. And then you blamed me for coming home at a bad time? Phyllis and Lucas stood there stunned. They'd never seen me like this before, speaking without stuttering, without apologizing, without trying to smooth things over. But this is family, my mother said weakly. Family always does that? No, I shook my head. A normal family respects boundaries. A normal family asks permission. A normal family doesn't use each other. Lucas clenched his fists. Where are you going to go now? What are you going to do with the money? That's none of your business, I replied calmly. I'll find a new place to live. And the money, my money, Silke, will be mine. You can't do this to us. Phyllis went from complaint to accusation. After all we've done for you, I raised you alone after your father left. I sacrificed everything for you and Lucas. It's an old song. Phyllis always remembered her sacrifices when she couldn't get what she wanted. I'm grateful for that, Mom, I said quietly. But it doesn't give you the right to control my life, my house, my money. Then you're not part of this family. Phyllis cut me off. If you're not helping your family, then you're not one of us. I expected those words to hurt me, but strangely, they didn't hurt at all. It was as if I'd known for a long time that my value to them was measured only by my usefulness. If a family is people who use me and don't respect my boundaries, then yes, I'm not part of that family. I headed for the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to continue packing. You know where the exit is. They left, slamming the door so hard that the glass shook. And I was left standing in the middle of the room, feeling strangely light. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying for years had suddenly disappeared. $3 million. A sum that seemed unreal when I looked at my account balance. $3 million for a house I loved, despite all the painful memories associated with it. Now that money was sitting in my account, and I was sitting in the middle of someone else's apartment, surrounded by boxes of stuff, and I didn't know how I felt. It had been a week since I had moved in. The apartment was in a completely different neighborhood in Midland, on the north side, in a quiet complex with security. 2 floors, panoramic windows, balcony overlooking the park. I rented it without bidding, signing a 6-month lease, just enough time to decide what to do next. The phone was silent. No calls from Phyllis, no messages from Lucas. Complete silence, as if I'd ceased to exist for them the moment I stopped being useful. It didn't surprise me. I knew my mother could hold a grudge for years, and my brother had always followed suit. I didn't give them a new address, but I did forward the mail through a service that hid my whereabouts. It wasn't that I was expecting important emails. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything important. The doorbell rang on Friday morning, exactly 1 week after moving in. I wasn't expecting visitors. Peering through the peephole, I was surprised to see a familiar figure. Peyton Hamish, my former roommate, stood at the door with a paper bag in her hands. "Peyton, how did you— found you?" She smiled. "I'm sorry for the intrusion. I was worried when you suddenly disappeared. The realtor wouldn't give me your address, but I noticed the name of the moving company on the car that took your stuff. I made a couple calls, used my old legal connections." "Why?" "Honestly," she shrugged, "I don't know. It's just, you suddenly disappeared after we talked, and I felt guilty. Like I'd pushed you to make that decision." I opened the door wider, inviting her in. "It's not your fault. You just told the truth." Peyton handed me a bag. Homemade cinnamon rolls. I know it's corny, but I always bake them when I'm nervous. We settled into the kitchen, where I'd already unpacked the bare minimum of utensils. While the kettle was boiling, Peyton was talking about the latest developments in the neighborhood. Greenwood had started buying up other houses, and prices had skyrocketed. We got to talking, first about nothing, then about more serious things: her decision to give up her legal career for art, my work in cybersecurity. She told me about her divorce 5 years ago. I told her about my failed relationship. Peyton left, leaving her phone number and an invitation to stop by any time. I met her twice more, at a coffee shop and at her studio, where she showed me her paintings. "I paint emotions," she explained, "not the subjects, but how they make you feel." My strange new friendship with Peyton was the only bright spot in the monotony of my new life. The phone was still silent, not a word from my mother or brother. 2 weeks after moving in, on a Thursday night, the doorbell rang again. I thought it was Peyton. We'd agreed to have dinner together. But through the peephole, I saw a different face. Phyllis was standing at my door, and even through the small opening, I could see that she was crying. My mother, who prided herself on her fortitude and despised public displays of weakness, looked broken. "Mom?" "Audrey," her voice shook. "May I come in?" I stepped back silently, letting her into the apartment. She looked around the space, but unlike her usual visits, she didn't comment on my choice of furniture or arrangement. She simply walked into the living room and sank heavily onto the couch. "How did you find me?" "Nolan," she said. "Don't be angry with him. I said it was a matter of life and death." I wanted to be indignant, but something in my mother's face stopped me. She looked emaciated. Gray skin, sunken eyes, wrinkles I hadn't noticed before. "What's wrong?" Phyllis clasped her hands in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. "I didn't know how to tell you," she began quietly. "I didn't want to bother you. You're always so worried about everything." "I have breast cancer, Audrey," she said finally. "Diagnosed 8 months ago." The room spun around me. Cancer. My mother, who had always seemed indestructible, had cancer. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't want to worry you." She smiled weakly. "You always take other people's problems so personally." And then, there was hope that the standard treatment would do the trick. It didn't? The standard treatment didn't work. Phyllis shook her head. "I had to find an experimental treatment. It wasn't covered by insurance. I took out a loan, mortgaged my house." I looked at her, and the picture was slowly coming together. "So you wanted to use my house as collateral?" I said slowly. "For the cure. She nodded without looking up. A loan at 30% interest. There were no other options. The banks turned me down because of my credit history. I had about $400,000 left to pay, but I was 2 payments behind. I closed my eyes, feeling a heaviness growing inside. My mother was dying, and I didn't even know. She was struggling with illness and financial problems, and all I could think about was my resentment. Why didn't you tell me sooner, before I sold the house? Phyllis shook her head. Pride, I guess. I've always been the one to solve problems, not create them. And then, after our fight, I didn't think you'd want to help. What about Lucas? Does he know? He knows now, she said. I told him last week when it became clear I couldn't keep up with the payments. What did he say? Phyllis grinned bitterly. That he'd help, but he was on the verge of ruin himself. His wife filed for divorce, demanding half of everything, and his business project failed. The partner ran away with the initial investment. Why did you come here now? I asked bluntly. She looked up with a mixture of shame and determination. Because in 3 days, the bank will start foreclosing on my house. And without a house, I can't continue my treatment. I need a place to recover from the procedures. So there you have it. My mother didn't just need my support. She needed my money. Part of me needed the $3 million I got for selling the house. Part of me wanted to offer help immediately, to pay off her debt, to save the house, to do anything to ease her suffering. That part, nurtured by years of giving and compromise, automatically looked for ways to solve someone else's problem. But the other part, new and still unfamiliar, made me observe the situation as if from the outside. I saw the sincerity in her tears. Phyllis was really hurt and scared. But I also saw familiar manipulative patterns, the timing of the confession, the appeal to my guilt, the barely veiled plea for help. I don't know what to do, Audrey. She wiped away her tears. I never thought I'd be in this position. All my life I've taken care of you and Lucas. I've always been strong. Her voice trailed off, and she covered her face with her hands. I sat across from her, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching a scene in a movie. My mother was crying, needing help, and I couldn't bring myself to rush to her like I'd always done before. I need to think, I said finally. This is a lot of information at once. Phyllis nodded, wiping her eyes. Of course, sweetheart, I understand. I shouldn't have barged into your life so suddenly. Was it just me, or was there a twinge of resentment in her voice? Typical Phyllis, even in a moment of despair, she found a way to make others feel guilty. She turned around at the door, tears in her eyes. You know, I've always been proud of you, Audrey, even if I didn't show it. You're the strongest of us all. You just never saw it. The door closed behind her, and I was left standing in the hallway, feeling conflicting emotions struggling inside. Sympathy for a mother fighting cancer, anger for her keeping it from me, caution at her manipulation, and somewhere deep down, fear of losing her, despite our differences. I went back into the living room and sat down on the couch, still warm from Phyllis's presence. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Nolan. You gave my address to my mother. I'm sorry, he sounded remorseful. She said it was a matter of life and death. Not an exaggeration, I agreed. She has cancer. Shit, he exhaled. Audrey, I'm so sorry. After the conversation, I went out onto the balcony. It was getting evening, and the lights in the park were coming on. People were walking their dogs, couples holding hands. Normal life went on, even though my world had turned upside down again. I thought about my mother, about her illness, about her manipulations, about Lucas and his problems, about the money in my account, the money that could save Phyllis's house, pay for her treatment. But something kept me from making an immediate decision. Perhaps caution, developed over years of my family, taking advantage of my kindness, or a newfound sense of self-worth that kept me from rushing in to save everyone without a second thought. The decision to help my mother came the morning after her visit. I woke up with a clear head and a clear understanding. I would help Phyllis pay off her medical debt, but I would do it on my own terms. Not out of guilt, not out of fear of disappointment, but simply because I could. I called the bank, and paid her entire loan at once, $423,000, including interest and late fees. The bank officer was surprised at such a large transfer, but I explained the situation, and in an hour the paperwork was done. Phyllis's house remained her property, and the debt was paid off. Then I called her. Without preamble, I told her that the debt had been paid, and the house was no longer in jeopardy. Audrey. Her voice trembled. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, I said calmly. I didn't do it to thank you. I'll pay you back that money, she said confidently. As soon as I get better, as soon as I get a job. It's not a loan, I interrupted. It's a gift. But I have one condition. Phyllis was silent, clearly not expecting this turn of events. I need space, I continued. Emotional space. I'll help pay for your treatment, but I need you to respect my boundaries. No uninvited visits, no unsolicited advice, no manipulation. I've never manipulated you. She launched into her usual defense. Mom? There was steel in my voice. If you want me to help, accept my terms. Otherwise, I'll just transfer the money back into my account. There was silence. Finally, Phyllis said quietly, Okay, I understand. After that conversation, I contacted Lucas. He didn't return my calls for 2 days, but then he called back. Audrey, he sounded unsure. Mom said you helped her with her debts. Yes, I confirmed. And I want to help you too. You do? He didn't hide his surprise. After everything that's happened? You're my brother, I said simply. But I have conditions. I gave him $150,000 to restart the business, but I insisted on being a silent partner with the right to control expenses. Lucas resisted. His pride was hurt, but eventually agreed. He needed the money more than he needed the illusion of complete independence. Helping the family felt strangely detached. There was no schadenfreude at their dependent situation, no warmth from a duty fulfilled, just practical problem-solving. I was no longer emotionally involved in their dramas, no longer experiencing their problems as my own. It was freedom, painful, unfamiliar, but real. A month after paying off my mom's debts, I decided it was time to move on. The rented apartment was comfortable, but it didn't feel like home. I started looking for a place that could be my new haven. Not as big as my previous home, but spacious and private enough. I found it by chance, a small house half an hour outside of Midland, on the edge of the woods. Single story with 3 bedrooms, a terrace, and a garden. It was built in the 70s, in need of renovation, but it had a sense of soul. And no memories, no legacy, no obligation to the past. I bought it for $750,000, a modest sum compared to the $3 million I had in my account. I divided the rest of the money. I put some of it aside for my mother's medical care, some of it in safe investments, and spent $500,000 on launching my own business, a cybersecurity consulting firm. It was a dream I'd been putting off for a long time, afraid to risk stability for the sake of the unknown. The renovation took 2 months. I fully immersed myself in the process, choosing materials, colors, and furniture on my own. Every decision was mine alone. Every detail reflected my tastes and needs. There was no compromise, no "what will Mom say?" I kept in touch with Phyllis, but distantly. I called once a week to check on her well-being. I paid her medical bills. Sometimes I'd drop off groceries or books, but I always left before any questions about my life or unsolicited advice. Lucas was more difficult to deal with. He vacillated between gratitude for my financial help and irritation at my control over his business. His pride was hurt that his younger sister, whom he used to think of as soft and accommodating, was now dictating terms. But gradually, he began to recognize that my approach was working. The business was slowly but surely getting back on its feet. Peyton remained in my life, a strange friendship that started with her invasion of my apartment and grew into something deep and real. She helped design my new home, painted pictures specifically for my walls, listened to my doubts, and didn't give advice unless I asked for it. When the renovations were finished, I took a step that seemed both natural and frightening. I invited my family over for dinner, not out of a sense of obligation, not because it's the custom, but because I wanted to try to start a new chapter in our relationship, on my terms, in my space. I cooked dinner myself, nothing complicated, simple dishes that I knew how to cook well. I set the table on the terrace, which overlooked the garden and the edge of the forest. She arranged the candles, laid out the napkins, opened the wine. Phyllis was the first to arrive. She looked better than when we'd last talked. The treatment was working. Her hair was starting to grow back from the chemotherapy, and there was a blush on her cheeks. She'd brought flowers. Not cut flowers, but potted flowers so I could plant them in the garden. "It's a beautiful house," she said, looking around. "It's nothing like the old one." "That was the idea," I said, taking the flowers. She nodded, as if she understood something important. "I'm happy for you, Audrey. I really am." There wasn't the usual note of condescension or hidden judgment in her voice. Maybe the illness and the fear of death had really changed something in her. Lucas arrived late, as usual, but without his wife. They were still in the process of divorcing. He brought a bottle of expensive whiskey and awkwardly handed it to me, not knowing how to behave in this new situation where I was the mistress of the situation. We sat down at the table, and the first few minutes passed in awkward silence. No one knew which topics were safe and which could cause tension. I poured the wine and raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said simply. They raised their glasses, and something in the atmosphere changed. The tension didn't disappear completely, but it became less oppressive. The conversation flowed, tentatively at first, with long pauses, then more freely. Phyllis talked about her treatment, about the new drugs, and the doctor's promise of a full recovery. Lucas talked about business, about new clients, about future plans. I listened to them, inserting questions where appropriate, but not sharing my thoughts or feelings. Lucas squirmed uncomfortably in his chair. "I'm sorry for what we did to your house," he said abruptly. "For the vase, for the photo albums, for everything. We acted like assholes." His apology, clumsy and belated, was the first I'd heard in our entire relationship. I nodded, accepting it. "Thank you." Phyllis opened her mouth, as if about to add something, but changed her mind. Instead, she just covered my hand with hers. "You're a good daughter, Audrey, better than I deserve." Those words, said without drama, just as a statement of fact, touched me more than any of her previous emotional statements. When it was time to leave, Phyllis hugged me, gently, as if afraid I would push her away. I responded to the hug, but discreetly. "Could I come back next week?" she asked. "To help with the garden, perhaps?" The old Audrey would have agreed immediately, afraid to offend by refusing. New Audrey hesitated. "Let's do it next Saturday," I finally said. "Afternoon? But let me know in advance, okay?" Phyllis nodded, realizing it was a compromise. Not a total acceptance, but not a rejection either. Lucas waved goodbye awkwardly, not knowing how to act. I smiled at him, showing him that everything was fine. "Your business plan for next quarter," I reminded him. "Don't forget to send it to me by Wednesday." "Of course, partner." He grinned slightly, but without the same condescension. When their cars were around the corner, I went back to the terrace. I put the dishes away, blew out the candles, closed the bottle of wine. All these ordinary activities in the silence of my new home filled me with a strange sense of finality. I stepped out into the garden. It was evening, and the air smelled of grass and damp earth. In the distance, the forest rumbled, the wind rustling in the crowns of the trees. I breathed in, feeling the tension of the day these months slowly let go. Dinner hadn't been perfect. Our relationship hadn't magically healed. Old grudges hadn't disappeared. But something had changed. The invisible walls I'd been building all my life, walls of concessions, compromises, repressed feelings, now took shape. Not to wall myself off from my family, but to define the boundaries of my space, my identity. I sat on a bench by a newly planted apple tree. Someday it will grow, bear fruit. I will be here to see it. Or I won't. Who knows where life will take me? But right now, in this moment, I was exactly where I wanted to be. In my home, in my garden, in my life. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if our relationship with Phyllis and Lucas would truly change, or if they would fall back into old habits at the first opportunity. But I did know one thing. I would no longer build walls of concessions, hide behind a smile, or sacrifice myself for the illusion of marital well-being.